Nice call.
There we go. So, my name is Tamara Coburn, and I'm the lead ESL teacher in Winston-Salem for Forsyth County Schools. And with me today is Lanny Simpson. Lanny.
Yes, and I'm Lainey Simpson. You may see my name in print as Helen. That's one and the same. And I am the EL director for Burke County Public Schools. We are in the western part of the state, halfway between Asheville and Hickory, right on I-40.
And we're also joined today by Susan Waltz and Ivana Manthor Anderson from the DPI team. So, they're here. I don't know if they want to say hi, but we're glad to have them here with us today. And our session today is on English language development standards for leadership. So we're wanting to take a more data-centric approach to what's happening with the ELD standards. I guess I could have had these while we were introducing ourselves, but here we are and where we're from. Lanny.
Okay. And Tamara, if you'll drive, let's talk
Mhm.
about our objectives for this morning. And so, as Tamara has already clued you in, we are going to explore multilingual data outcomes. We felt it was important as adult learners to establish the why of why be interested in ML data and how that impacts us instructionally. And so we'll explore those data outcomes. We're going to look at strategic uses of multilingual data in our own school context in improvement planning. And then we're going to then take a bit of a turn and look at the English language development standard courses study, which is new in implementation for this year. And we're going to look at some of the resources that DPI has developed to go with the standards and to assist in implementation. And how we're going to talk about how you can use those to impact your data outcomes.
Absolutely. So as we get started, please feel free to add to the chat one of the verbs from our learning objectives that strikes you, or a different verb that really is going to center your purpose for being here with us today. As Lanny said, we want to establish that why. And so just to record, just to put it out there, add a verb or a statement that says why you're wanting to be here today, why you're joining us today. So Lanny, my verb is leverage. I
Ah,
really like being able to take all of these resources and leverage them because it's a tool and we can make changes with this lever.
exactly. Exactly. Here we go. So Elsa says implementation
Hmm.
or implement. Absolutely. Right. And so explore. I
Yes.
like that as well. So we'll explore data and we'll look at leveraging it for implementing the new standards. I support. Oh, that's a good one, Joy. Yeah, we want to be able to support our teachers in implementing the new standards. And to that end, I am currently meeting with my teachers one on one to see where they are and what their needs are for support in implementing the new standards, because we realize that it can be overwhelming
Mhm.
as an educator to implement new standards. And so how can we come alongside our staff is so important. And Allison, absolutely, to grow.
So thank you, everyone. I just added in the day one handout, so please grab that. And you'll be able to see the slides. And more importantly, you'll have the links that we're sharing throughout the slide presentation. So today, we are going to be looking at ML data, why it's important. We want to start our first session out with a look at this data and to consider how multilingual learner data connects to school report cards. Coming up on day 2, we'll take a data dig to see how multilingual learner data can help schools and districts reduce the achievement gap. And on day 3, we're going to examine a proactive approach to multilingual learner data using these English language development standards aligned intervention strategies. And so again, connecting to our why is our ML data important? And so you might be familiar with the NC STAR indicators, and we're looking specifically at C2.01. So our access scores show up in our school performance grades and in school long-term goals. Students who take the access test are also taking other tests within the North Carolina accountability model. So even though we're going to be talking about one test, the student who takes that one test could count up to 4 times in that accountability model.
Okay, so let's actually take a look at our indicators. If you work in a K-8 school, and this may be a reminder for you, it may be new for you, but these are the 3 indicators that are funneled into the school performance grade for K-8 schools. So there's an academic indicator, which combines reading EOG scores with math EOG or Math 1 if you're taking Math 1 in 8th grade. And that is simply the percentage of students who are proficient on those tests. And then the second indicator is the science EOG scores. And that, of course, is 5th grade and 8th grade. So, as Tamara pointed out, you may have students who not only take the access test, but are also taking the reading EOG, the math EOG, the science EOG. So we're concerned about their performance in all of these indicators. And then finally, English learner progress. That is new with the submission of the ESSA plan. DPI submitted this in 2017 to the feds, and they have rolled in English learner progress. And we're going to look at how that affects the 80% proficiency score. These 3 indicators count for 80% of proficiency. Okay. And today we're going to focus on the ELP. And if you are serving at a high school, you may well know that English learner progress is one of 7 indicators that funnel into the 80% proficiency score. And we will drill down into L progress here in just a minute. Okay. So you may or may not have seen what is known as the progress value table. And this is a progress value table depending on, and it gives us the annual expected overall access score. So if you look at the leftmost column, you'll see that it says initial access assessment score. And so that is a student's very first access score that they take. So, for example, if you have multilingual learner enroll in kindergarten, this would be their initial access score. If you have a newcomer coming from another country, their year 1 in U.S. schools is going to be reflected by their initial access score. And so if you notice, the higher the initial access score, the student is expected to exit within a shorter time frame. So you see here, if a student enters somewhere at level 1, they actually have 6 years in which to exit. You would consider this initial year 0. And so think about it. So if a kinder enters with little to no English, they would be expected to exit English learner status or ML status by the end of elementary school. And if you notice, if a student begins at a level 2 down here at the bottom, they have a shorter time frame in which to exit. And so those students that score at level 2 actually have 5 total years in which to exit. And so we have linked the entire L progress value table here on the slide, and it also includes the business rules that go with it. And we're not planning on getting down into the weeds today, but for a student to be on the table, you would have to have that initial score. And so basically, what we have with L progress is a fraction. The number of students who are meeting their annual target goal divided by the number of students who have 2 access scores, because you've got to have 2 access scores to get onto the table. Okay. So our next critical question would be, does L progress show up in my school performance grade within my context? And so it's the classic, do I have a subgroup? So if you have 30 students or more in your accountability grade, so if you're serving at an elementary school, that percentage of students who are meeting their annual target goal, if you have 30 or more in grades 3 through 5, they're going to show up in your school performance grade. In grades 6 through 8, it's the same. And then for high school, it's simply grade 10. So you have to have at least 30 students or more in grade 10 for that percentage of students to be funneled into that school performance grade. And we're going to explore that. And so you'll see here, and you may well be familiar with this map. DPI has a map where you can go, and all you got to do is Google it. You can just type in North Carolina school performance grade, and it's going to take you to the DPI webpage, and there's a direct link to this map. So what I'd like for us to do is Tamara's going to drop the link into the chat.
Give me just a second to grab it.
All right, Tamara.
I think that's the one you wanted.
Yeah.
Does that do it? Okay. Yes. And it is on the handout. Thank you, Allison, for reminding us of that.
Okay. So I want us to take about 3 minutes to explore our school performance grades. So you're going to hover over your county and then click into the report, and then you will scroll to find your specific school. It's going to have all the schools listed in your district. So what I'd like for us to do is take some time to do that. And let's head over to the guiding questions, Tamara. Okay, so what I want you to do is find your L progress. And then how does that compare against North Carolina's L progress? What percentage of students met their annual target goal at your school or in your district vis-a-vis how students did across the state of North Carolina. Another really important question I want you to consider is, how does my L progress compare against my other indicators? So if you recall, if you're a K-8 school, you have three indicators, which would be the reading and math combined, the science EOG, and then L progress. If you're high school, then there are 7 indicators to consider. So you may need to go back to the slide to look at all of the what the 7 indicators are and then explore those on your school performance grade. And then what conclusions can you draw? How is L progress impacting your school performance grade? So we're going to take about 3 minutes, and I'd like for you to go and explore your school performance grade stats, keeping these guiding questions in mind. Okay, so what we'd like to do next is for you to unmute and share, or you can put it in the chat. So share with us how your L progress compares against North Carolina. Perhaps you might have looked at other schools in your district. How does your L progress compare against your other indicators
Mhm.
that funnel into the school report card? And what conclusions can you draw?
If this is the first time you're looking at this data this way, it might seem overwhelming, and you don't have to sound like a brilliant data scientist in the chat or unmuted. We just want to hear what you're noticing.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you for sharing this information. The data I see is encouraging. I see my schools in Brunswick County outperforming the state and in the English learners progress. I see one student at 45% compared to the state 21%. I saw several students 35%. The highest is I think is 45%. Compared to the state. Now, the question I have is, and this may be a silly question, but I know this is EOC's scores or NEOG scores. Does this align with EVA's growth, or how is that compared? Is that where the percentage come from?
No, this is the 80% part of the school performance
I
grade
see.
that refers to proficiency. Like, were my students proficient on the EOG or an EOC? Or, as far as L progress goes, did they meet their annual target goal? There's another 20% of the school performance grade that relates to growth and performance measured by EVOS. So we're only talking today about that 80% part of the
Proficient.
school performance grade that is measured by, were my students proficient on fill in the blank, EOG, EOCs, or as far as L progress, did they meet their annual target goal?
I see. Thank you so much. I think, like I said, this is encouraging data that I see. I'm going to dig more deeper into it and look at the past years and maybe establishing our goals with our ESL team for the previous year, for the next years. You know, looking at the data from the previous years and establishing goals for the next year.
Awesome. So important to have that, use data to then have a forward-looking plan. Okay, who else? Let's see. My school is meeting or exceeding EOG goals, but poverty students and ML students are below district and state averages. Okay. And is that for your L progress or just as far as all indicators go?
I'm sorry, I got here a little late, so I was just kind of perusing the report card. And so
That's great.
I don't know why the report card isn't broken down by which subgroups are meeting. All I can see is that it seems like we have a B, it seems like everything going well, we're exceeding growth. But then if you look at the needy children, we're not doing as well when I look at either the percent of economically disadvantaged kids.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not really clear what this is saying, so I have to maybe go back and dig some more. And then if I look at the ELL progress, where it's measuring other measures, ELL progress.
It's measuring the percentage of students who meet their annual overall composite goal. Think the table that we looked at. There you go, Tamara. Each year your L students have that goal, and if they met it, then they're a yes and they're counted in the numerator. And if they didn't meet it, they're not counted in the numerator. So what you see in your report card are the percentage of kiddos who met their annual L progress goal.
So this is my question, right? Because I teach at a middle school. So many of my kids are those kindergarten kids who didn't exit in 5th grade. Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh,
Put them in 6th grade. They should have exited in 5th grade. Does that mean they count against us automatically because they're already now a year behind, even though we didn't do it?
Yes, if in fact they, and it depends their trajectory. The most a kid is going to get is 6 years in which to exit. So, yes,
What
they're,
does that mean?
well,
Before
because
it counts against them.
right, because if you enter at a level 1, the maximum number of years you are allowed in which to exit are 6 total. This is counted as year 0. So if I'm a kinder, right, by the end of elementary school, I'm expected to have exited. So yes, the L progress is it's like an all or nothing. Like if you haven't met the exiting time frame, then they're counted against you every year until they do exit.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's helpful information that I didn't know. Thank you.
absolutely. And thank you for
Joy says this
sharing.
is her first time looking at this.
Uh-huh.
There we go. And I think that might be true for more than just Joy. So Joy, I don't think you're alone being the only, the first time looking at this. And then Allison is letting us know that she sees a marked difference between elementary and secondary, which is probably a thing we anticipated, Lanny.
Oh, absolutely. We know that the progress value table is it's linear and it expects a growth rate like this, a positive growth rate. And we know from data-based research that language acquisition grows more like this, like you slow down as you are entering older grades, your language growth slows down. We also know that at higher proficiency levels, growth slows with regard to language acquisition. And that's true for all language learners, for second language learners. And so we see that pattern, Allison, absolutely. If you look at your elementary schools, they are going to have higher percentages of students meeting their annual target goals than secondary students do. And so we'll look at tools to help bring along those secondary students. We do realize that it is a more difficult job. And Melissa, it is very true that it's harder in secondary to actually achieve that growth that we see on that annual progress value table. But it is something we are all rolling up our sleeves. And it's probably what you knew intuitively anyway, if you have worked with English learners for any length of time. Okay. Anybody else? Let's see, Naomi. That was my question. Also, how do we know the subgroup of L performance in EOG and EOC? The school report card does have subgroups. You have to click to be able to see the subgroups. I don't know if
Do
we have.
you want me to try to do it?
Yeah, we can try to do it,
Okay, let's
Tamara.
see what I can do. Okay, tell me where to go.
All right, since you're on my question, I am following up also on students that are in secondary. It's extremely hard to push them to gain the growth. But the other thing that I noticed, I have a very small population in my school.
Uh-huh.
Like one year there was 20 students in secondary, but 10 of those students also were diagnosed as EC in some
Uh-huh.
form or another. And so what I find is as they get older, if they have other things that are making it more difficult for them to progress, they don't meet that growth either in their language. And so I don't know, I always wish it could be separated out to see, look at this is the reason, there's other factors and the reason why it's difficult for them to show growth. And then the other question I have in regarding the English learner progress is that I see my percent, but I also see the state of North Carolina percent,
Mhm.
and mine is saying 21%. So the state, only 21% of the students that are ML are actually meeting their expected growth. Is that correct?
Mhm. That's correct.
Hmm.
You were spot on, and you are so right about it, as MLs progress through the grades, if they've not exited often by the end of elementary, we find higher percentages of our MLs classified as EC as well. I can tell you in my own experience in my district, um, almost a third of our secondary MLs are also classified as EC. And so we recognize that is an added challenge, and really points to that collaboration between you and the EC teacher, as we also know that serving students gets more difficult when you have a student who has EC minutes written into their IEP that they must meet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay,
Did
Miss
you want me
Tam.
to drill in?
Yeah, let's go to Burke. Okay. Scroll down. Okay, let's look at Forest Hill Elementary, the green tile on the right, Tamara.
What do I click?
Just
Oh,
click
I did
on
it.
it.
Okay.
Okay, now scroll down. Do you see that capsule? Wait, Tamara, go up just a little bit. That capsule that says view performance by school or district and then view performance by subgroup. So if you click on that on the right,
Subgroup.
Tamara, the subgroup, then scroll down and you're going to see, you see the subgroups that are
Mm-hmm.
delineated in the legends. And if you hover over it, good, you're going to see the various subgroups performance. Okay.
All right. Do you want me to keep scrolling?
And Tamara, I'd like for you to let's look at the L progress for Forest Hill Elementary.
Okay, that
So,
means
so you may need to go out of the subgroup capsule and click on, there you go, and then scroll down. Keep going. Okay, keep going. We see. There we go. And so Forest Hill did exceptionally well. A little over 47% of their kiddos actually met their annual L progress goals, their annual composite access score. And you notice that it is well above the district average and the state average of 21.1%. And if you'll scroll back up just a little bit, Tamara, and let's look at math and reading. If you'll hover over Forest Hill in the math, and the percentage there is a little over 37%. So I can conclude that my percentage of L progress, which was at 47.7%, is impacting the school performance grade positively vis-a-vis the math performance. It's better. We've got a stronger percentage of students meeting their annual access goals than we have percentage of students being proficient on math. And Tamara, if you'll hover over the reading performance to the right there, and we have Forest Hill reading performance at 34.8%. Again, I know that my EL teacher is impacting, and her students are impacting that school performance grade positively vis-a-vis what they're doing in reading and math. So it's a helpful way, I think, to look at how are we doing with our L progress vis-a-vis how we're doing with the other indicators. And it will really vary. And as you all have, Allison wisely pointed out, in secondary, those percentages are, in fact, we struggle to meet those, as you all know from your experience. Okay.
Looks like we have a question from Elsa.
Okay.
Yes. You mentioned that this performance is based on EOG proficiency, but you also were talking about access growth. So is this performance based on EOGs or access?
It's the L progress is performance on access.
This
Right
one.
there. That one. Right?
Okay.
Did you meet your annual target goal or not? And
Yes.
then reading and math is simply, were you proficient? Were you, and if we're looking at the green bar, then were you grade level proficient? Did you make a 3, a 4, or a 5 on your math EOG or your reading EOG? And so the percentage of students who are proficient on their math EOG, their reading EOG, and their science EOG are counted positively in the numerator. They're meeting proficiency. If students are meeting their annual access goal, they're counted positively in the numerator as well.
Okay, thank you.
This is Jaime, and I
Hi,
have
Jaime.
I have two questions actually. The first one is if we go into the subgroups, we can see our ELs and how they perform in each one of those assessments, right?
Yes.
That's the first question, and the other one is the different indicators, do they weight the same? So if you have 4, you just divide those, and each one is going to be 25%. If it is 7 divided, or do they have different weights?
They're self-weighting. So the greater the number of students, so you're going to have more students taking the reading EOG or the math EOG than you are taking access. So there's the denominator is larger, so it's going to impact your school performance grade greater. So and and also remember that you got to have 30 students in your school for it to actually be funneled into that school performance grade. You may only have 10. You will see if you have 10 or more students, you'll see it reported, the L progress on your school report card. You'll see that statistic there, the percentage of kiddos who met their annual target goal. But if you only have if you have less than 30 in those grades 3 through 5, if you're elementary, then that stat will not be funneled into the school performance grade. But you're right. When you ask about the weighting, it's a really important question because, yes, they are self-weighting depending on the number of students who actually took those tests. And we know that we have fewer L's than we do all students at your schools. Great question.
Thank you.
One more question in the chat, Lanny from Allison. Are our monitored former English learners still counting in the English learner subgroup?
Yes, as far as students, yes, they are, and that is designed to help us actually.
Right.
Right.
Because we
Right.
exit our students at a composite 4.8 on a scale that goes up to 6 with no ceiling for 6. And so we do exit them early, and I like to say we exit them to struggle, and then we expect them to continue developing English through the use of English in content areas, and then that should be then reflected in how well they perform on those tests and in that subgroup. The only thing we wouldn't get then is that they're not still taking the access test, so they're not going to show up in that part.
Exactly, Tamara.
Okay, did you see this one from Elsa about Hispanic versus English learners in the subgroup categories?
Let's see. I'm looking for it.
Why does some data show Hispanic and not English learners on the subgroup categories? Is it because the population is less than 30?
Yes, ma'am. You were spot on. Great conclusion.
I am struck by how important it is for us to take the time to slow down and really look at this data. As educators, we understand the importance of data, and then we also know that we all have a little bit of data trauma, like a little bit of we're not quite ready to look at this data. And so one of the things Lanny and I were hoping to accomplish is a slow look that we can start to make meaning and make sense of what you're seeing here. So please let us know if you want some more time on this, if you have another question, if you just want another 3 minutes to look. Now that we've kind of shown you what to see, we can spare another 3 minutes to let you look again. Let us know. Go ahead, Melissa.
So I put this in the chat a couple of times, so I just want to make sure I'm understanding the numbers correctly.
Okay.
So when I look at the EL performance and I look at the state, which is at a 21%, that number includes all K-12 students, correct? Even though I teach middle school. Yes?
That number includes all students in accountability grades. So grades 3 through 5, 6 through 8, and grade 10, who have 2 scores, who have 2 access scores. Because you've got to have 2 scores to get onto the table.
So that 21% at the state is, I'm just going to rephrase to make sure I still got it. And I'm sorry that it takes me a minute.
No, take your time.
The purple score of 21% for the state represents students 3 through 10 who have 2 EL scores.
3 through, no,
Yeah.
not including 9th grade.
Okay, not including 9th grade, but
Not
it's
including.
basically a composite score of all grade levels that I'm comparing to my band of 6-8. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
It's not a 6-8 band being compared to a
No.
6-8 band.
Right.
Got it.
Right.
Thank you.
Right.
I really needed that. Thank you.
Right. And I will tell you, Melissa, look at your district's performance, and that also helps you see where you are in, and also other middle schools in your district. Like that will give you a clue. Is there somebody that's really um, pushing their kids well to meet their annual target goals, and what can I learn from that person? I mean, we have some folks in our district who sometimes feel like they're wizards at you know um exiting their kids and and getting their kids to meet those annual goals. And then there's some who it's harder work for whatever reason. But when we find those folks, we want to know their secrets, right? Of what they're doing. But you were right. The state percentage that you see are grades 3 through 5, grades 6 through 8, and grade 10. And it's all kids who have 2 scores. So, like, kindergartners aren't in that statistic, right? Because they're brand new. Newcomers aren't in that statistic because they're brand new, right? They only have 1 year. You got to have 2 years to get on the table to see how much you've grown.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? Okay.
And I think we come back around to some of that again in day 2, if I'm not mistaken. And Lindsay asks you to say that part again about comparing to other middle school or high schoolers in the district.
Yeah, so absolutely. If uh, what I would do is look at the other middle schools or high schools in your district and see how they're performing. Do they have a higher percentage of kiddos who are meeting their annual target goals? And if so, who's teaching there, and what are they doing? Um, to affect such good results. Or maybe everybody is, you know, struggling with getting their secondary kiddos to meet those annual target goals. And how can we, as a group, corporately come together and work toward leveraging tools to help those kids meet those target goals. And, it's something that we all grapple with. It's the reality of the way the table is designed and what we know about second language acquisition. And so we're working within those confines, but corporately, we can come together and help each other to meet those annual target goals as best we can for our kids.
One more question in the chat from Allison. Is there anywhere that all this data is compiled in a spreadsheet so we don't have to make our own? Like, is there anything on this page, Susan, that if, or Lanny, that if I click, it gives me a spreadsheet or a CSV?
No, that would be, I would tell you, if that's where you want to talk to your accountability director,
Your data people in
and
your
see
district.
what kind of spreadsheets she or he um, develops. My accountability director does a really great job with pulling the data and putting it into spreadsheets so that we can get kind of an at a glance um, report. And one thing that I always do for my folks at the beginning of the year is we take a backwards look at our L subgroup performance on things other than access. So the reading EOGs, the math EOGs, the science EOGs, etc., or EOCs. So yeah, I really would. I'd reach out um to your accountability director.
Okay.
My understanding is pretty much limited to El Progress, and I have cursory understanding, I'd say, of the other indicators, but that's where you want to leverage the expertise of your accountability director.
All right, and before we move on, I just want to check in with Elsa. I see your hand is raised, and I want to make sure if you have a new question, I want to make sure you have a chance to voice it. Okay. So now I think we're ready to move on.
Okay. So what we've just done is we have performed a historical look. We're looking at how we did last year, and Tamara and I like to call that the postmortem. It's the autopsy. We're looking at historical results. So our next question would be, well, what are my ML outcomes? What's the diagnosis? That's what you guys just did a deep dive on. You looked at how your kids were performing on L progress. In other words, were they meeting their annual target goal or not? What percentage of your kids met? And so, how did we do? How did we do vis a vis the percentage of kids who met math, the percentage of kids who met reading, the percentage of kids who met science? How did we do vis a vis elementary schools if we're a secondary school? Or how did we do vis a vis our other secondary schools if we are secondary or other elementary, or vis a vis the state? So, you guys just really took a deep look at how your ML outcomes compared and what conclusions you could draw. And so our next question would be, we're going to dig around and we are going to look at the North Carolina ELD Standard Course of Study, and we're going to look at instructional resources that accompany the standards that DPI has developed, and think about how we can use those resources to affect positive outcomes for our multilingual learners. In other words, we want to have a good prognosis.
Yes, so we're moving into our resources, our part of our program today. And again, just like Lanny said, we're asking how these new resources, the new standard course of study, and all of the ancillary things that North Carolina has built around that support multilingual learners, their teachers, and this audience as school instructional leaders. So we invite you to follow this bit.ly. So while I'm saying the next few words, feel free to go ahead and get another tab opened up here. So in March of 2021, the North Carolina State Board of Education approved the 2020 edition of WIDA's English Language Development Standards as North Carolina's standard course of study. This document includes things we're going to unpack in the next few slides: the English Language Development Standards, key language uses, which we will hit on over and over again, language expectations, and proficiency level descriptors for all students grades K through 12 and their N6 grade level clusters. One of the objectives of the NCELD Standards Resource Hub that I'm asking you to go to, found at this bit.ly on the screen, is that multilingual learner stakeholders like yourselves will access these standards-based resources that will assist with planning, instruction, and professional learning designed to support effective teacher and principal preparation and meet the diverse needs of our multilingual learners. So one of the things we talk about in English language proficiency or English language development a lot is that we take an assets-based look at what students can do. And I like to say that we need to do the same thing for our educators, an assets-based look at what educators can do and then how we can support that moving forward. So while we're going to introduce you to this framework in general, we believe that one of the most important takeaways from any introduction to the new framework is to remember that the 2020 North Carolina English Language Development Standards are organized around 4 overarching language genre families: narrate, inform, explain, and argue. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of time to get there, look at the bit.ly, click some buttons, click around, and then we'll come back and continue our walkthrough. Okay, I don't see anybody asking for extra time. We're going to be kind of working through this slowly, and I'll put in this plug that for the summer Growing Multilingual Learners Conference, Lanny and I with our colleague Karen are going to dig back into these resources. And so we invite you to join us this summer at the Growing Multilingual Learners Conference. So here's a look at the standards framework in its organization. The standards themselves are unchanged and describe that multilingual learners will communicate information, ideas, and concepts for academic success in the content areas of English language arts, math, science, and social studies. These are broad, overarching standards that we've had since 2004. WIDA has then looked at language across key language uses, overarching language genre families. And I mentioned those before, but I'm going to go ahead and say them again. There are four: narrate, inform, explain, and argue. And we'll get into details more about that shortly. Then we dig into a more granular level within the content areas and the key language uses to language expectations or language goals that all students are expected to meet. These are delineated much the way that most standards that teachers see are written out. So we have a code, and so we will look at the anatomy of a language expectation, and you'll see how similar that is to any other standard that you're used to seeing for content areas. And then finally, we have proficiency level descriptors, which detail possible language trajectories across the 6 levels of language. They're not embedded in content, but they describe language at the discourse, sentence, and word level. So we're going to take a look now at a language expectation. And what we want to show you here is how it's built. And so here's something that Lanny created to show us how the little punctuation symbols are working to kind of create our code.
Yeah, Tamara. So it always starts with ELD, and then there you'll see a dash, and it will delineate the content area. And those are the classic 5 standards that we've had around since what, 2004, I believe it is.
2004.
Yeah. So students will communicate information, ideas, and concepts necessary for academic success in the content area of fill in the blank: language arts, math, science, and social studies. And then, as I'm sure many of you are already familiar, there's a dot, and then the grade band is next. WIDA with Access delineates the grade bands in this fashion. And I'm sure you're totally familiar with those. Then there'll be a dot in the key language use. And again, it's the classic 4 key language uses of narrate, inform, explain, and argue. And then finally, WIDA delineates with a dot and then the mode of communication. So interpretive, WIDA's expanded what they used to call receptive language, which is still it is still receptive with listening and reading, but they've expanded it by adding in viewing. Because as you all are well aware, as being educators of multilingual learners, videos are a fabulous resource. And in particular, when you are building text sets for your students, and oftentimes you start out with a video to build that background knowledge. And then finally, the other mode of communication that WIDA has developed that's new with these standards is expressive. And so they've expanded speaking and writing to also include what they call representing. So, drawing, sketch notes, graphics, you name it. And so, that is how a language expectation is built as far as the nomenclature goes. And as Tamara's already pointed out, it looks a whole lot like standards from other content areas?
So we just want to take a minute, and not to get weeded here, but just a minute to notice the difference. In English language development, we only have 5 standards, but we break those out into these language expectations, which look like everybody else's standards. So here at the top in the navy blue box, you're going to see English language development standard 4, language for science, which says multilingual learners communicate information, ideas, and concepts necessary for academic success in the content area of science. And as Laney says, sort of fill in the blank. That works for all 4 of our content areas, plus our social and instructional language standard 1. But then underneath that, you're going to see 2 English language development language expectations. And again, these look like the nomenclature of any other core content standard. And we're seeing again how there's the hyphen, the periods to separate the standard, the grade level cluster, the key language use, and our mode of communication. And you can see that we have sort of parallel language expectations between interpretive and expressive. So the language expectations are really kind of where we're going to see all of the support resources that North Carolina has broken out for us. They're all going to be based on these 4 key language uses, and then how we can support students using language for these academic purposes.
And
And Lynn,
Tamara,
you want to take us through this?
if we can go backwards just a second. If you'll notice this particular language expectation that we have boxed, and Tamara has already shared that it's the content area of science. Look there, grade band 4 through 5, and then one of the 4 key language uses explain. And then this particular one that we have boxed is expressive. So we're going to expect students to construct scientific explanations that describe observations and or data about a phenomenon. I could have chosen any of these other language functions that you see bulleted, but this is where my students are. And so I want my students to be able to describe those observations and or data about a phenomenon. So as you can see, we really are getting very granular in our expectations for our MLs. And not only are we getting more granular, the rigor is very much increased, because prior to this, we had the model performance indicators, and we had to generate our own performance indicators based on the navy blue broad overarching standards. And it really left a lot to the imagination, let's say. So these standards are very explicit and very granular as well.
Yes. And Lanny, I'm going to go a step further and say I think they help teachers do language work at appropriate levels for language that stay within the grade level standards, right? So we're not battling in the same way. How do I lower that rigor? We have a way now to maintain that high rigor, that high expectation, and then when we get to proficiency level descriptors, we can see what it might look like at different levels.
Perfect. So right. Okay. And so, as Tamara said, we're going to take a look at an anatomy of a language expectation. And as you can see, the navy blue box is the standard 2 for language arts. And again, you'll see that this particular standard or language expectation is for grade band 6 through 8, key language use of narrate and interpretive. And so the language expectation takes us into the weeds, so to speak, with the language needed for success in that grade level cluster in the area of narrate, and the mode of communication is interpretive. So we know that we're focusing on either listening, reading, or viewing. and then you're going to select one of those bullets, a specific language function. So you might identify a theme or central idea. That might be what you need your students to do. Or maybe it's analyzing how the character attributes develop across the events or plot line, if you will, or evaluating impact of specific word choices or to impact meaning or tone. And Tamara, as a former language arts teacher that you are, I'm sure these um, language expectations really ring true to what
Mhm.
you know as a former ELA teacher.
Yes. And I will say, especially in ELA, because I don't know science and math the same way, but our narrate and inform uh, key language uses and language expectations really line up with ELA standards, like on grade level, the exact same skills, with a little bit more information for the teachers of how to help multilingual learners achieve these expectations.
Exactly.
So, we talked about the four overarching language genre families, and here they are again: narrate, inform, explain, and argue. And Lanny and I will say to anybody that we think this is the place to get started unpacking this new framework and our new North Carolina English language development resources. So, we're going to take you through each one in turn. Lanny?
Okay. So let's start with narrate. And I think this is a very intuitive key language use. You're going to find narrate in stories, novels, um, historical accounts, biographies, which may, the social studies end of things you might not have thought about with narrate, because we certainly know that it lines up beautifully with reading literature as far as English language arts goes, but also applies to the content area of social studies.
And let's look at inform. So, this genre is about communicating generalized factual information. And of course, it's found in information texts. And we're going to see it in things like reports and how we're classifying, comparing, contrasting, or doing a problem solution. So, we're just talking about the what and the facts is where we're going to get informed.
Okay. And this typically overlaps very well in science, and social studies as well. This is a pretty big category. And then so finally we're going to move to explain. And so what I'd like for you to do is enter in the chat some examples you might could give me for explain text, and some genre examples. So we have on our slide sequential, causal, cyclical, factorial for you mathematical people, explanations. And so tell me some genre examples. Here we go. Naomi's in science life cycles. Absolutely. That's a classic. And you think about cause and effect literature. When you are reading and you're pulling that graphic organizer for cause and effect, there you go. That's going to fall
Mhm.
into the overarching language genre of explain. Oh, here we go. Okay. History. What events lead to a war or ending a war? Absolutely. Right. Let's discuss the causes of the American Revolution and their impacts on the development of the war. Exactly. Compare and contrast. Okay. So it may be an inform, but it may overlap to explain when you find yourself using the word because quite frequently, or due to, or as a result of. And well, that's one thing that WIDA does say in their standards resource guide is these key language uses certainly overlap within units and lessons, but what they encourage us to do is to consider what's the overarching key language use for our unit or our lesson. And a real key to that is, what does your assessment look like? And so keep that in mind as you and your folks wrestle with the 4 key language uses. And Tamara, our last category?
Our last one is argue, and I like to point out that we are not asking children to argue with one another or with the teachers, but in an academic sense, we are making claims and supporting them with solid reasoning and evidence, and we're challenging claims that others make and encouraging our classmates or even the experts that we read to consider other perspectives as well. And so argue really does show up throughout schooling, minus kindergarten. Argue is one of the biggest categories that we see repeated over and over again um, across these 4 key language uses. And I'm going to reiterate what Lanny just said. And our quadruple VIN here shows it as well. That while we are talking about narrate, inform, explain, and argue as discrete genres of language, they really do overlap and intertwine, and they're the 4 key language uses because we'd have found that they are all present in all grade levels and in all content areas. So these 4 key language uses are the language of school that's going to have the biggest return on our investment, K-12, for helping our multilingual learners grow and then have equitable access to the content and curriculum.
Tamara, you are so right. And I'd like to add that we just sifted through tons of children's literature, adolescent literature, informational texts, curricula, national standards for content areas to distill these 4 key language uses that appeared over and over in student text.
Mhm. And one thing I hear, Lanny, frequently, and you might hear, and maybe people with us today are thinking in their heads is, wow, this stuff gets really complicated. And nobody's wrong when they name that working with multilingual learners can get complicated. We're talking about students who enter with different levels of schooling at different levels of English that have different reasons for being in our schools versus where they have come from, and all of that is complicated. It there's layers of ways that we need to support these students, so nothing is straightforward and simple. But what I would say is that these 4 key language uses are are the biggest thing that have unlocked all of this for me as a teacher, as an educator, and as someone who's trying to really get into and understand these standards. And Lanny saying the same thing. These 4 key language uses form the foundation of all of the resources available through WIDA and through North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, what we've provided to teachers to support them in that work. For
Absolutely.
example, Lanny. Oh,
Oh,
sorry, you were going to say something else.
no, that's okay. I've lost my thread of thought, so I'll keep moving. Okay, so toward that end, when we think about the 4 key language uses, and now I remember my thought, Tamara and I agree that the 4 key language uses are a great point of entry for teachers because they're intuitive. And so let me share with you something if you haven't already seen these. Um, Tamara and I have created what we like to refer to as portfolio guides organized by key language uses. And if you'll notice the verbiage on the leftmost column here, these we pulled directly from the WIDA resource guide. These are snapshots of typical instructional tasks or activities that students do within a grade band, and they're organized by the 4 key language uses. And so simply what we did is we're like, oh my goodness, this would be a great formative tool, and we could use this to guide us in collecting language artifacts for our students to demonstrate their growth across time. So we simply added these columns to the right. Q1 represents quarter one all the way through quarter four. You could put dates in those boxes when your students completed a task that related to that particular description. So, for example, if you are teaching in the middle school, and you might your students may have underscored the significance of events in a narrative, and so you might put that save that piece of work and put a date in the particular quarter where that student actually produced a language artifact where you can trace their progress across time. And so when you think about, we've talked previously about access data, right? And are our students meeting that annual target goal for access or not? As you are very well aware as an educator of multilingual learners, we don't have benchmarks, we don't have check ins. And so we felt like a formative tool to help us gauge our students' progress toward language development would be a really helpful thing for our teachers. And so, what we're going to do is, we'd like for you to take some time perusing the portfolio guides, and then we're going to talk about how you might could use these in your practice and of what benefit they might be. So, Timmer, can you drop the link in the chat?
Can. And I think we set it up to force a copy because
Yes. I,
we're pulled from WIDA and from their snapshots, and we want it to be something that works within your context. So what's happening in that grade level already in your content area classrooms. So it's editable.
And so,
So make use
Tamara,
of it.
you know what? I linked it to force a copy on our slide, and
Oh,
it's a more
but not
recent,
this one.
not that one.
Okay,
So
well, don't edit if you can. Just make a copy.
make a copy.
Okay, good. Thank you, Naomi, for confirming that. We always get a little nervous when we share a direct link that might be editable.
Yeah, and that's neat that you ran across it when you were in the hub. Yep. Okay. But you still have to, you can't edit. Yes, definitely make a copy. And this link will take you to all grade bands. Okay. So let's talk about the benefits of using such a tool. And feel free to either unmute or put it in the chat. Or you may have already discovered this tool and be using it.
We would love to hear those stories.
Mm-hmm. And I would share with you that um, it's not necessary by any means to have every block checked or a date. As Tamara loves to say, start small but start now, or
Yes.
is it start now and start small?
You know what? Same difference. Let's get going, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming.
Right, right. And so I've shared with my teachers, if you can have just two samples for narrate, inform, explain, and argue so that you could see starting point, ending point. Um, I I'm in the process of meeting with my teachers on how things are going with using the portfolios. So we just are dipping our toes in the water, if you will, with regard to using this tool. One of my teachers yesterday that I met with had made a copy for each student. And she still uses those good old black and white marbled composition notebooks and just had this pasted on the inside cover and put dates, had some dates in on it. It doesn't, you can do it digitally. I have a teacher who is actually doing this work digitally, which is really pretty cool, I have to say. That kind of thing is impressive. She uses Seesaw, Flipgrid, takes pictures of writing samples, and that works really well if you've got a real techie oriented person. So, as Tamara's already clicked on one of the bullets, it really does promote collaboration between teachers. And let's see, let's look at some of these comments.
Oh, sorry. I keep going too
No,
fast.
no, no, no. Right. Our ML team members paired up and worked backwards to create a lesson that would help students demonstrate one of these. Um, Absolutely. I love that backwards planning design. Naomi says, I love it. I think it would be a great way to communicate with content teachers to make sure MLs are learning what is in the ELD standards. Exactly. And collaboration between teachers is really key for this, because one thing that we have told our teachers is you don't have to, it doesn't only have to be the work that happens in your classroom. You can, if you see your colleague doing something in English language arts and you're like, ooh, that's hitting the key language use of narrate or inform, whatever. And could I get a copy of that for my students' portfolio? So it's not all on their shoulders, and it really gives teachers a great opportunity to work together in a positive way, right? We're not at cross purposes, but we're like, oh, I love what you're doing. And that really hits the key language use of fill in the blank. And so it's a great way also to integrate that language and content.
I love hearing from Allison that she's ready to start aligning this resource with curriculum documents as an assessment piece for all students.
Ooh,
Absolutely.
Allison. Tell us,
That's
unmute,
amazing.
tell us a little bit more about that.
Oh,
Oh, that
I think she said her
so
mic wasn't working earlier. Somebody
yeah,
said their
she
mic wasn't working.
did. Well, and I'm sorry about that, but that is a really interesting thought for
Right.
usefulness for this particular
Mhm.
document.
I
Love it.
do. I love that everybody gets to be brought into it.
Can
And
you hear me?
oh
Yes.
yes,
Okay, I had to just take my AirPods off. Um, so my thought was, with one of my schools, I consider moving to the TESOL model of SWELL, the school-wide English learning. And so that pulls in some things from letters for the early elementary. But this would kind of go along with that same model of everybody being a language teacher, with the goals of aligning the English language development standards with your regular classroom standards. Um, I don't know how hard it would be, but my thought would be that start small, um,
meaning maybe kindergarten,
Mhm.
and then move forward. We are almost at the end of letters, so we'll actually begin implementing next year. So maybe if ESL teachers work kind of outside of that for the first year, and then the second year roll it into Gen Ed PLCs.
Mm. I
I
I
love it.
think you've got a great plan. Absolutely. One thing that my lead teacher and I did was we took we use HMH's into reading for ELA for elementary. And so she aligned our ELD curricula. We used Reach from by National Geographic Cengage, and she aligned it, and then we also took our ELD curricula and analyzed it for the appearance of the four key language uses and pulled out assessment pieces or created assessment pieces that would tie in with the four key language uses. Because WIDA does tell us always look toward that summative assessment piece to help give you a clue of what that overarching key language use is.
Right, and we are in the middle of a literacy curriculum adoption for 3.5, so that might even be a more logical place to start.
Yeah,
But just thought.
absolutely. Yeah. And also we another benefit would be for assessment and monitoring our kids' progress through classroom assignments as well as our own. And please know that your teachers can add a line. Like once you make a copy of this, you can add a line. There are plenty of other instructional tasks that your folks do that would relate to the four key language uses. And
Mhm.
they are free to add a line and describe that task and pop it right in. This is not a static document.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I love, Lanny, is when I get to show this off to teachers that I work with to say what part of this looks familiar. And there are pieces that are already so familiar because it really is born of that deep dive that WIDA took that you mentioned earlier into the curriculum that's already happening, the standards that are already across um, our states. And so there, instead of being one more thing, it's targeting and leveraging the thing that already is. And I love that because I think a lot of us are tired of one more thing. So Lainey, I'll let you take a look at Naomi's question about Cengage in the text in the chat, and I'm going to move on to the model perspective of a school leader. So we've looked at and considered tools for your teachers to use in collecting artifacts that demonstrate language growth across time. We love that you really like that tool, and look forward to hearing stories about the collaboration that brings for you in your contexts. So let's examine what your role as an instructional leader in your school might look like. And we're going to focus here on a model of uh, this North Carolina public school administrator, Claudia, and what she wants to be able to do. And if you find some of your roles connected to some of Claudia's roles, feel free to add that into the chat. So Claudia wants to advocate for school-wide engagement in supporting her multilingual learners. And she works to help shift mindsets towards an assets-based philosophy. And she endeavors to create equity of access and opportunity for all learners, which also happens to be one of the big ideas for the North Carolina English Language Development Standard Course of Study framework. So feel free to add to the chat one word or phrase that comes to mind when you think of how school leadership intersects with multilingual learners. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kelly.
Advocate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lindsay. Yes.
Ooh, accountability for all students. Yeah. We wanted to use a model school leader because we thought we'd build on the concept of Nina and her
Mm-hmm.
model,
Mm-hmm.
as a model student and with model language. So we're like, oh, let's think about what a model school leader would look like in terms of MLs. Prior to, oh, absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
Melissa. It would be so nice for school leaders to prioritize the needs of Ls, shift mindsets. Absolutely. Um, that is a continual work, is it not? So
Mm-hmm.
that we move teachers' perception of multilingual learners from one of deficit based and lacking English to one that a student brings multilingual assets, and what a gift that is for those of us who are not completely bilingual. The gift of bilingualism is amazing,
Mm-hmm.
and I have worked with students who actually told me, and that was this semester, that they had no idea that being bilingual was valuable, and
Mm-hmm.
these were middle schoolers.
Yeah. So we're moving into our leadership conversations. We want to make sure that you have time to speak with your colleague leaders from different schools. But before we move into those breakout rooms, are there any questions about what we've given you so far, the North Carolina English Language Development Standard Course of Study, how access test scores play into school performance grades, or anything else you want to ask us a question here before we send you to conversations? You've been very communicative. Lainey and I love it when we get to hear from participants in our session. So thank you so much for that throughout.
Absolutely. Yes, indeedy.
Okay, Lainey, I'm going to let you start sending them off.
Okay. So, before we get started, we're going to think about some guiding questions as we break off into our groups. And so, I just want you to reflect on how might this deep dive into multilingual learner data, or or the start of a deep dive, and dipping our toes into the new standards and the accompanying resources. How might all of this play in together to help you guide professional learning at your school or in your district? How might you work with teachers, other school leaders, including families, to provide guidance on language development? How might you support the teachers in your district or at your school in designing and enacting linguistically and culturally sustainable curriculum, instruction, and assessment? And then finally, how might you promote collaboration uh, using these resources that we've shared with you today amongst your district and your school leadership across content areas, um, language development teachers, support staff, truly a whole school approach. And so those are some things we'd like you to consider as we send you to breakout groups.
So, Susan, we're going to ask you to set that up and move people
I've
out.
got it set up. Are you ready to start?
I think we are.
We are, and we'll put the guiding questions back up on the screen.
Okay, I've sent everyone to their breakout sections. Just let me know when you want me to end the session.
Welcome back, everybody. It looks like we have everybody back.
I think so.
Okay. So we want to remind you one more time about our leadership conversations. And of course, you might have taken your conversation wherever it needed to go. But please unmute and share out loud a striking takeaway from your conversation. Let us know what is going to stick with you as you leave this conversation.
I guess I'll go ahead. Sorry, no, someone else talking over. It just said in our group, we all were in more of a leadership role. And so we thought the snapshot would be a good way to start, especially in PLCs, and to implement. If we hadn't been going to PLC, how could we find a way, even if it was just, once a month, not every time, but to start that conversation with teachers. And we thought that'd be a good communication tool to start with.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Naomi. Anyone else? Laney, and I think that if we publish, if we say it or write it, then that makes it more firm in our minds and our intentions to follow through. So we do want to give you a moment to publish your thoughts.
Hi, this is Claudia. We, in our group, it was a mixture of a teacher and administrator, and we were very pleased to have one principal of an elementary school, and we all thought that it was great that he took on the Mr. Shaney, if you want to talk about it too. That it was great that leadership from school was present and wanting to know how to support the MLs at the high population in his school, and he wants to learn how to support the students because in the end, it's going to reflect on the school. So it was great that we had that conversation. How can we help our teachers, and how can we share the ideas, and how can we share these standards with all of the staff and make them understand it's not only the job of the ML department, but it's the job of everybody in the school. So it was great to have Mr. Cheney in our group.
Yeah, and I was a part of Claudia's group as well. So that was something we kind of talked about, was knowing that if we pour into these students, knowing that 30 to 40% of our school population are Hispanic, and of that, a third to even sometimes a half are MLs. So knowing that, and knowing that if we can impact them in a positive way, and then give all of our teachers, not just our ESL program department, but also our classroom teachers, like if they feel that buy-in, we're having that conversation across ESL, we're having that conversation across EC, that's just something that we need to increase and really understand that it is all of those things. And I loved going through the unpacking, or with specifically the mapping portion, and being able to connect with, it's like, yes, those are great conversations to have with those MLs, with the folks that teach those MLs, but not just in the ESL class, like in our classroom teachers, and say, how often are these things happening in your classrooms? Is there a quarter one instance? Is there a quarter two instance? When are you intentionally planning those things? So I just thought that was a really good resource, and I'll definitely be taking that back.
We will get into mapping on, I believe it's day 2. Someone else in my breakout session also alluded to the mapping document that they had come across when you all did your exploration of the resource hub. So many great resources, and we will continue to talk about leveraging those resources. Okay. And so, is there anybody else that wants to share before we move on? Just want to make sure. Okay. So we invite you, if you have time before next session, there is a Canvas course that DPI has recently published. that Tamara and I spent many hours developing, understanding the ELD standards. And there is a wonderful self study learning checklist that kind of gives you a good overview of what the course is like. We're not asking you to take the course before next time by any means, but just to do a little exploration in it and see if there are tools that you could use in professional learning with your teachers. And I feel certain there are, and it would be great to steal from. We also want to specifically point out Module 7 and Module 8 of that Canvas course, to see more about mapping and unpacking. And you all have segued us beautifully into the importance of the mapping document as far as collaboration with content area folks. And so just if you get a chance to explore those before our next meeting, that would be terrific. And just consider how those resources might help you in supporting your teacher's implementation of the North Carolina ELD Standard Course of Study. And Christian, we applaud you for that whole school approach, and we need dozens more of you out in our schools for sure.
And please feel free to invite anybody who you think would benefit from these sessions to join us on our next 2 sessions, where we will spiral back around to some of these things and dig a little bit deeper as well. So just as a reminder of what's coming up on day 2, we're going to take that data dig to look at multilingual learner data as how it can help schools and districts reduce the achievement gap that we might have noticed. And on day 3, we're going to take a proactive approach to multilingual learner data using the English language development standards aligned intervention strategies that you've already had a chance to explore some of. And we invite you to stay in touch with us if you'd like to pursue this conversation further in your specific contexts. So we thank you all for sharing your time with us today. We do look forward to our next session together. And we do have a few more minutes, 2 more minutes for more comments and questions. We know some of you need to get back to the work in your building, so feel free to exit as you need to. But if you have a few more questions, we'll be here.
Oh, you're welcome, everybody.
I have a question. It's Susan. So I have the next session on April 25th and then the third session on May 16th. Are those dates correct?
They are.
Okay, I'm going to just go ahead and put that in the chat then.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.
It also includes today's date, but just to be sure we all have them.
And if you get into digging around and come up with more questions, feel free to email either one of us or both of us, and we're happy to help you in your journey as well.